Here at the Learning Hack, we do not consider the crystal ball a useful piece of business equipment. We're humble enough to admit that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we're always a bit sceptical of those who say they do. But learning professionals in strategic roles are constantly being called upon to make guesses about what learning will look like 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, and further. They have set targets. They have to make plans. They have to make some kind of assessment of the available data and look ahead. We talked to 3 of them this episode. Stick with us and you'll find out how these CLOs envision the future of learning. Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
All 3 of our guests have presented and taken part in events organised by iVentiv. This is not a puff piece for our sponsor, marvellous people though they are, but we are grateful to them for giving us this access to senior level people and their thinking about learning futures. You'll hear interviews with Anne-Valérie Corboz, Jane Underwood and Sarah Otley. Kate Fitzgerald, head of FACT, is stepping down from the rest of the season due to ill health, sadly. But don't worry, we're not in a post-fact world here at Learning Hack. I'll be giving you our guests' biographical notes.
Hack Facts.
Anne-Valérie Corboz is Dean of HEC Paris Executive Education, consistently recognised as a leading institution in its field. Anne-Valérie brings a unique blend of C-suite level leadership, entrepreneurial vision and a global perspective to executive education and leadership development. So hi, welcome Anne-Valérie. It's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Learning Hack.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So Anne-Valérie, you are Dean and Professor of Executive Education at HEC Paris, which is how I'd pronounce it. You pronounce it differently. First of all, could you tell us a bit about the school and what it does for students?
Yes, absolutely. So HEC Paris is part of what we call the Ivy League in France. It's a school that was founded in 1881. So it's one of the oldest business schools in the world. We have 3 separate business units, if you want to call them that. One is a graduate school with a master's degree. Then the other one is an MBA, EMBA unit, and then we have executive education.
At the iVentiv event recently that you spoke at, and I was supposed to be at, couldn't because I was ill, and the HEC hosted, you spoke about innovation. So what blocks innovation in organisations, and what are the sorts of things you teach at HEC that can promote and unblock it?
That's a very broad question. That if there was a silver bullet to what blocks innovation in organizations, I think organizations would be using it today. It's a whole series of things. It goes with a mindset, so a culture, trying to avoid a not invented here syndrome, trying to embrace exploration. So if you look at organizations, typically they're designed for efficiency, right? Because you want to be able to do the product, the service that you're offering as efficiently as possible. And that means taking out everything that's exploration, because exploration is inefficient. So building in that muscle of let's fail, let's experiment, let's try, it is not an easy one for organizations. It's easier in some industries where you have large profit margins, but in industries that have very small profit margins, to divert some of those resources to exploring is a difficult sell. So there's the mindset culture piece. There is the willingness to disrupt one's own industry. So the famous stories around, Kodak, who invented digital and then didn't do anything with it. And there's many other examples since then. So taking yourself out of your own business into a new stream of business is not easy either, because you have resources invested in the existing streams. It's the willingness to open the boundaries of the organization to the outside world. So to have a flexible boundaries where you bring the outside in, where you look at trends. This is why a customer centricity, design thinking have become so important in organizations, because we try to think, what does a customer want? Who is not a customer? What would a non-customer want? How are trends, global trends, even changing our business? So it's a lot of different dimensions in terms of innovation in the organizational context.
It's interesting that you say that you need to have a kind of fairly profitable organization to be able to innovate. I think, well, traditionally we tended to think that smaller startup companies can be fleeter of foot, can move fast and break things, and the innovation comes from that end of the market, which of course I suppose isn't necessarily true, because large companies like Google and Apple can devote large amounts of time and money to having innovation departments. So what's going on with that tension there? Are small companies, small entrepreneurial companies, no longer the source of innovation?
So it's two things. I think indeed there's a myth. There's a very significant part of disruptive innovations that come from the corporate world and not from startups, simply because they have so much more resources to put behind a problem, to problem solve. So Apple being a good example that you just cited. That being said, yes, indeed, the only competitive advantage of a startup is its ability to be much closer to the ground, much closer to the customer, and problem solve. Why does a startup become successful? Because it's innovated in some shape and form. It could be the way it reaches the customer, it could be the product or the service it offers the customer. But because it doesn't have a history and a whole series of resources allocated to a specific track, it's more nimble, more agile. It's not attached to something. It can think on its feet. So it can afford to be a lot more innovative because that's its competitive advantage. But we mustn't forget that a lot of organizations have designed very efficient innovation DNAs. I don't want to call them departments because they're not necessarily departments, but have built innovation DNAs. Even companies, for example, like Holcim, that's in cement, have innovated how cement functions today and some of the properties of cement. So we shouldn't forget that a lot of innovations can come from large corporations, but that the sole competitive advantage of a startup is its capacity to innovate.
Yeah, it's a good reminder there that innovation is not only about digital products, it's also about stuff you can see and touch and all the rest of it. However, my next question is going to drag us to that digital realm fairly squarely. One of the questions at the collaboration cafe at the iVentiv session I mentioned was, how are you as learning and development leaders maximizing the potential of generative AI? Of course, that is a question that is on everyone's minds at the moment. So what's your take on that question?
So that's a very good question. I think if you're saying L&D leaders, it obviously depends quite a bit on the industry that these L&D leaders are working with. If you're looking at the education space, it's a very good question because I don't think we know yet. AI and generative AI means we cannot ask the same questions in the same ways to our students because ChatGPT will give them the answer. So anything that the traditional case study, we cannot do anymore. Anything where information is readily available to them, we cannot do anymore. So we have to go a lot more in the direction of creative problem solving, of being thoughtful and mindful about the way you approach a problem. So it's going to change the questions we ask, how we ask them, about what we ask them. I think also as a faculty member, we will use generative AI to help us frame problems in a way that might be more complex or more interesting, I don't know, for our students. In the L&D community at large, there's obviously everything that can be done digitally to support learning in the corporate space. So large LMS systems with corporate libraries that will propose very customized to the learner content from thousands and thousands of databases. So there'll be interesting things happening in that space in terms of very individually customized learning tracks. But I don't know that we know beyond that what that will really look like yet.
Another question that came up at the iVentiv conference, and one which is going to be a central preoccupation of anyone in business school, is leadership. That's a big focus for executive education. We have a different type of person now, a different flavour of person now, arguably, leading the world's biggest corporates. I mean, people like Zuckerberg, Musk, Bezos, etc., who would appear to challenge the traditional image of a business school educated corporate leader, and are more likely to have been influenced perhaps by people like Ayn Rand or Peter Thiel, René Girard, Nietzsche, than by names like Drucker, Hersey and Blanchard, Cotter and so forth. And even within the corpus of writings on leadership in the academic realm, there are figures like Barbara Kellerman and Jeffrey Pfeffer, who have been heavily critical of leadership training. We've covered them on my sister podcast, Great Minds on Learning. My podcast co-host, Donald Clark, doesn't have a lot of time for leadership, and he echoes a lot of what Jeffrey Pfeffer says, who basically says a lot of it is BS. So how does a modern business school react and respond to those two threads of change, really? Change is represented by the change in leaders, the type of people who become leaders. You might want to contradict that, me on that, say that in many ways they're the same as the old school of leaders. Elon Musk could be Henry Ford, for example. And the other thread of change, actually from within the academic literature, saying that leadership is a bit of a hype. Big question.
Thank you. So yes, big question. I think two things come to mind. One, indeed, I don't think the leaders of today are different from the leaders of yesterday. In that you will still find a whole portfolio of different leadership styles. If you take companies you were mentioning earlier, Bill Gates was a very different leader from Steve Jobs. Same industry, but very different profiles and personalities. I think we also have to be careful how these leaders are portrayed in the press versus how they lead inside their organizations. That being said, I think today we are more willing to accept different leadership styles. I think we had a very stereotypical image of what a leader was, a very sort of commander, almost military-based stereotype around what a good leader was. I think that's evolved a lot over the years. We know the organization of tomorrow leans more towards being one that is empathetic, one that is agile, one that is creative, one that is purpose-led. And so calls for leadership style that is more human-centric. And so I think the leaders of today are able to combine maybe some of the stereotypical leadership styles of the past and that shift towards a more human-centric organization, a more purpose-led organization, which frankly is what the generations of today are asking for. When they come for recruitment, they will often ask an organization, what's your purpose? Why would I work for you? What do you stand for? So I think that has changed. In terms of, is leadership still useful as a skill? I think one of the things that we're finding is that all of the hard skills can be taught quite easily. And again, AI will support a lot of the hard skills, right? You don't need to learn coding anymore. AI will do it for you and will do it much better than you. However, relationship building, leading without authority, so leading through influence, managing stakeholders, leading teams, building high-performing teams, building organizations that are positive workplaces. So all of the human dimension is going to be increasingly important. And that goes through leadership training and through leadership development. Now, I do think where I would agree with Pfeffer is that for a long time we had one recipe, right? And so it was kind of cookie cutter approach to leadership development, and everyone had to follow that style. And I think along with what I was saying previously, the fact that we embrace very different leadership styles, and so a lot of leadership development today is finding your own North Star and understanding what you stand for and how you want to lead, and maybe going back to what Greenleaf talked about when he spoke about servant leadership. I think that's what's changing. But I don't think leadership development is going to go away anytime soon. On the contrary, I think it's increasingly important. And I think one of the beautiful developments around that is that it's also more mindful leadership development of the context of the organization, of the point at which the organization is in its life cycle, of the culture. So we find a lot of demand for leadership development and for high-performing leadership teams, for building non-toxic organizations, for women in leadership. So I don't think that it's going away. I think it's done more mindfully.
From entrepreneurs and maybe people like Musk, one area of challenge you hear a lot and pushback is on what's broadly called woke capital. So kind of values-based theories of how organizations should behave and what leadership should be about, caring about climate change and basically being nice to people and behaving in a responsible type of way. And there is a lot of pushback on that involved in this kind of mindset of move fast and break things, and I'm going to fire half my organization and just deal with that, which isn't that hard to counter when the organizations of which people like this are the head are among the top 10 biggest and most profitable companies in the world? Aren't they doing something right?
Is what you're saying that a more tough... I'm not quite sure what you're saying,
well,
John.
I think what I'm saying is that, you may not like Musk, and personally I despise him, but you can't really argue with the fact that he has made an awful lot of money for an awful lot of people and invented some incredibly innovative products. And, in the sense of kind of, let's look for role models of people who know how to lead a successful company. He looks like one, but then you look at, say, the way he converses or messages towards his own children on his own media network, and you think this is a horrible person. How do you square those two when everything you hear from kind of executive training tends to be have values, be good to people, bring people along, listen, be empathetic, be mindful. Musk isn't mindful.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I think there's a difference to be made there between being a great innovator, an innovative mind, and being a great leader. So you can be truly disruptive and very innovative in the industries that you've chosen to be in, and not exhibit the kind of leadership style that one would expect of you or that is expected of today's day and age. I could argue, for example, that Steve Jobs was not an easy leader. And a lot of people would say was not a great leader, but he was truly innovative and people went along because they believed in what he was doing. And so I think what you're finding with Elon Musk is probably that people believe in the mission. They believed in electric cars. They believe in space travel. They believe in the Hyperloop. And so they're going along for the transformation of those industries and not necessarily for the leadership style.
If only we could have one without the other.
Yes.
So
yeah,
we have to close out now, unfortunately, so let's talk further. But finally, in our crowded and teeming media landscape nowadays, which obviously Musk's a part of, who in your view should executives seek out and listen to for sound judgment advice? I mean, who do you follow yourself? Who do you rate?
Yeah. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to give you a non-answer, which is I think the great thing with today is people follow the leaders that they feel closest to, the voices, the opinions that they feel closest to. And those might be other business leaders, might be politicians, it might be philosophers, it might be. So earlier on you were talking about Nietzsche or Kotter, and I think what's great is people will follow Nietzsche and Kotter. They will listen to a podcast. They will really pick and choose, and from that create their own leadership model. And I think that goes back to what we were saying before, that we've come to the realization that not one size fits all, that if we're going to really be sincere about embracing diversity, about being inclusive, then we have to include completely different ways. And it might be Mahatma Gandhi, it can be Nelson Mandela, it can be Steve Jobs, it can be whoever you want, as long as you're taking something from that leadership style that helps you build a positive, authentic leadership style.
Well, I think that's a good, if diplomatic, answer. And I think I've got to give a massive thank you to you today, as well as a bit of apology, because the questions are rather sprung on you at the last minute. And they've also been quite challenging questions because of, I think, the nature of the area that you're in. I felt I had to do it justice for the traditions of the Learning Hack podcast. So it's been really good of you to submit to this short interview. Thank you very much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure, John. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
If you're looking to connect with the top minds in learning and talent, there's no better place than an iVentiv event. That's IVENTIV. Since 2009, they've hosted nearly 300 interactive conversational events exclusively for senior leaders like global heads of learning. I've been a sponsor myself and found these events invaluable. Less about sitting and listening, more about real, impactful conversations. It's an unmatched opportunity to collaborate with leading chief learning officers on the challenges they're tackling today. Join the conversation. Visit iventiv.com/learninghack. That's iventiv.com/learninghack.
Hack facts.
Jane Underwood is Global Head of Learning at Reckitt. She has previously held similarly strategic level posts at Waits Group and Shell, and has also been a public speaking coach to senior career women. So hello, Jane. Hi, and welcome to the Learning Hack. It's great to have you on.
Oh, fantastic to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Brilliant. So you're Global Head of Learning at Reckitt, one of the UK's largest consumer goods businesses, principally cleansing products, I think, and nutrition, but lots of household name brands that everyone in the UK and US and elsewhere will know about. When it comes to learning, organisations have a lot in common, but every business has specificities. What are the particular challenges for L&D within Reckitt?
Oh, it's a great first question. So yeah, happy to share with you some of our challenges, and I think they're probably fairly common with other organisations. I think at the moment we're really looking at how we align our business strategy with our learning and development strategy, and ensuring they're really in sync, so that we are bringing value to the business. I think secondly, we're really looking at how we prioritise critical skills for the future. The world is changing so fast, and job roles are changing so fast, and it's really important that we stay that one step ahead to make sure we're ready for the future. And really for us as well, just making sure that we're bringing learning that has real world application, that's got real scenarios in there as well for our business. So we're not really standalone. We're really part of that business, and also ensuring that we measure as well, and we have that impact with the business that they're looking for from learning and development.
So that gives us a good overview, I think. Do you have any reflections from the iVentiv event in London you attended and spoke at? What stood out from you there?
Yeah, it's a fantastic event. Such a wonderful opportunity to get together with other heads of learning. And I think for me, just having that opportunity to network, to knowledge share, to brainstorm with peers was fantastic. I had the opportunity to facilitate a session on transforming your skills at scale, and just the ideas and the brainstorming that came out of that session was fantastic. So yeah, I definitely recommend it to anyone else if they get the opportunity to attend that in the future.
Well, the sponsor's going to be very pleased to hear that, I'm sure.
I'm sure they will be, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned skills there, and I know that's a big area of focus for you, and especially the shortening half-life of skills that perhaps you'd like to speak about. But Charles Jennings, who chaired the conference, talked when he was talking to me on this podcast about the great skills obsession. And I wondered how you react to that slightly sceptical way of putting it. As you know, old learning lags, or you may not, old learning lags, and I count myself in that number, tend to say when they're in their cups, oh, we had all this with competencies and it didn't work, etc. People are slightly sceptical about the whole skills obsession. What do you think?
No, I've heard that a couple of times, and I think it's really interesting when you look at the half-life of skills now. With that, I think the World Economic Forum puts that at 5 years for skills, and then 2.5 years for kind of technical skills. And I think the pace of change now with technology, with AI, and just the global change that we're experiencing is shortening that even further, and at a pace that we've never seen before. Especially when you look at the world of competency frameworks, when all of that was created, the pace was much slower. Whereas now we are very much looking at that skills first approach. I think I've seen firsthand as I've come through my career, the use of competency frameworks, career ladders, and just some of the rigidity it creates in organisations, and really looking at that kind of it really created quite a linear progression and a linear pathway for people. And really the skills approach now helps people move cross-functionally, cross business lines, and really opens that freedom more for the kind of the squiggly career approach as well. And people aren't just following these linear routes. They're moving around, they're using their skills, and they're building new skills that are not traditionally following the kind of the competency framework models. So they're building things like problem solving, which again can be applied to any function, any department, whereas the kind of the previous competency frameworks wouldn't have that ability. So I think it's really empowering people as well, with when people look at their own motivation, how they want to move and manage their careers. It's really putting that ownership, I think, far more in the employee's hands, to build their skill sets in the way they want to build them for whatever future roles or companies they will be working in.
Yeah, so I suppose there's a couple of things in that. There's kind of people having to learn new ways of working and doing the stuff that they're already doing. But then there is people having to do completely other things because, there's a lot of skills fade and jobs become slightly obsolete. So you have to get people to kind of retrain in other areas. What's the kind of fuel mix of that? Is there more of one than the other, or?
Yeah, I think it's really shifting. If we just look at the influence of AI on people's roles, and you look at the requirements on people to upskill in that particular area, and how they're using AI to benefit their roles, to improve their efficiencies, that need for constant upskilling is there, and I think it's really growing at pace. So how can we use AI to be more efficient, to do things faster in the workplace? So I think it's a really interesting time.
Yeah. Are you finding that there are any people who suddenly find that their jobs are slightly disappearing because of AI, or is it a bit early in the development?
I think we're very early in that process. I think we're very much at that point as a company where we're trying to upskill people in AI and what that means. And obviously for each individual and each individual's role, that can be very different. But we're really looking at what are the benefits that AI can bring to particular roles and individuals, and then ultimately as a company as a whole, how can we benefit from this new technology? So I think there's lots of energy around that at the moment, and lots of positivity when we look at the opportunities that we face, not just in L&D, but in a wider sense in the company.
Something that Charles Jennings spoke about that I know you were quite keen on at the conference was the difference between learning and performance, and a need to create cultures of continuous improvement rather than simply learning cultures per se. What's your take on learning culture and the great learning culture debate?
No, I think it's a great debate, and I think the word learning culture has been around for a while, but I think it's evolved more into that continuous improvement and that link to performance. And I think that the great analogy we often face in L&D, and the great challenge, is when people say, I haven't got time for learning. And what they're actually saying is that's not a priority for me right now. And it's understanding they don't see the value of learning, and they're not seeing it as a performance enabler or helping them to continuously improve. And I think that is a product of when you see standalone L&D, when it hasn't been linked to the business strategy, it's just a program or a course you're being asked to go on. And I think it's the key thing is really linking it to the business, to an individual's performance. And when you link it directly to things like project completion rates, customer satisfaction scores, efficiencies, people suddenly start to sit up and take note and go, actually, it's going to help me in my job. And they can actually access that learning in the flow of work as well. I think you've got to make it easy for individuals to really access that learning. And ultimately people seeing, well, why am I learning? Is this going to help me in my current role, or am I upskilling for something new in the future? When you've got that purpose to it, we find it's amazing. People suddenly find a time that disappears as an excuse, and people are very keen to jump into that learning.
Okay, so there's a kind of more of an emphasis on instrumentalizing your learning so that it has a tangible benefit for people and drawing them in. From that point of view.
Absolutely. And I think so much of learning is we learn on the job. Charles's model and the 70-20-10 and that sort of 70 part, so much of what we learn is the everyday, the experiences, the projects we're working on, the volunteering opportunities, all of those things just build every single day. And I think it's really being proactive and putting yourself in those scenarios where you can learn and you can build your skills, sometimes often without realizing that's what you're doing.
So another topic I've heard you talking to is learning ROI. And heard you quote a statistic that 74% of CEOs are looking for a report on learning ROI, while only 4% of development leaders are actually delivering it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be picky and ask you for a source for that, but Danny Johnson shared some data this year from her work that seemed to indicate that L&D was at last getting better at using data to show the value of learning. I don't know whether that's just in the US particularly or it's more widespread. But what, if any, signs of progress are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great question, and I can give you the source on my data as well. So I've got
good.
a great book called Learning Analytics by Maddox, Parsky and Hall. It's a fantastic, a very, very good 400-page read on you're breaking that down into its minutiae detail of how do you get the best from analytics. But I think it's an area that is starting to change. I think L&D traditionally have been fantastic at measuring learning hours, learning completions, courses completed, but it's not what CEOs are looking for. They're really looking for the hard data of business impact, and really reviewing if I'm making some serious investments in L&D and leadership, where's the value? What am I seeing back for my investment? I think L&D are becoming better at this. They're building much stronger partnerships with the people analytics teams, and they're really using technology and learning platforms now. I think starting to use that at a much stronger level to get that data to really start to track skill progression, behavior change, and ultimately that getting that business impact. And I think it's L&D are starting to change the language they're speaking with the business as well. And I think a lot of that is being driven by when we look at budgets, and a lot of companies are under pressure at the moment to deliver financially, and they're looking at their L&D budgets and rightfully so, asking those questions of what am I getting back for my investment? Where's the value coming back into this company? So I think L&D is shifting.
Yeah.
I don't think we're completely there yet, but it is starting to trend in the right direction.
And in your own practice, do you think that the kind of models, I mean, measurement is a whole area, and it's, we can get very nerdy about it. And there is a lot of kind of L&D speak around Kirkpatrick that can tend to be, and so on, that can tend to be, turn people off. Do you find that those sort of models like Kirkpatrick, LTEM, and or the others, which did a whole episode of Great Minds on Learning about, but now completely forgotten. Always do as soon as they turn the computer off. Is that language and those models and those methodologies, are they still useful, do you think, or is it more about kind of let's leap straight to performance data and focus on that, and rather than telling the story?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, I tend to use a very performance consulting type model, which jumps straight into the, what's the business problem you're looking to solve? What's the change? But I think we use the Kirkpatrick model a lot, and I've kind of, shaped it and put a beautiful color boxes around it now. But essentially, it's the same model to share with our business, because people will still say, they will jump straight to the solution, which is I need a training course, please. And people still do that today. And we really use that model to sort of backtrack and explain to them when we look at value, what value is that going to bring? What problem is it actually solving in the business today?
Yeah, it's interesting that that type of thinking is still alive.
Yeah. I remember you using the Kirkpatrick model, kind of way back when I did my COPD qualification and first got into L&D, and it's fantastic. I still use it today. Yeah,
because I mean, measuring learning is difficult. I mean, in some circumstances, it can be quite simple. I heard of a car manufacturer who they found in the manufacturing process a lot of seat covers were getting destroyed, and this was a cost to the business because it was, a high-end car, won't mention any names, and the material was quite expensive. And they found that they could track who had taken the course and the number of spoiled seat covers going down, and so they had an immediate ROI for it. And I remember this going around as quite a lot as a statistic that was quoted. But people would say to me, well, I'd give my eye teeth for a situation that's as simple to measure as that. In a lot of cases, you can't kind of take other factors out, and it just isn't that easy. Is it getting easier with new technologies and a more kind of digitized work environment?
Yeah, I think there's definitely elements of that, and it really depends on what the learning is. I think I worked on some programs once when we were looking around difficult conversations and helping people upskill, and you look at can you measure that percentage impact on the business, and we measured it in slightly different ways in terms of escalations, complaints, processes being more efficient, which ultimately had an impact on the business in terms of time away from key roles that people were having to deal with these issues. So we were kind of quantifying it up in that way. And I think it's really looking for those key measures. And the business I was in at that time was very much your time is money away from the job. So we could quantify how much time managers, leaders were away dealing with issues. But it is, looking for those key metrics.
Yeah. So the measures are very often there. They're not always the same ones, but very often.
Yeah, and it's different every time. You've got to have that agility to really dig underneath that and find the metrics.
Yeah, agility is a good word.
Yeah.
So finally, in our crowded and teeming media landscape nowadays, who in your view should executives seek out and listen to for sound judgment and advice? Who do you follow?
It's a great question. I think there are a number of ways they really need to do that. I think certainly similar to the iVentiv event, it's seeking out those opportunities to network with their peers, with people in other executive roles at key events in their industry or cross industry. I think it's also around seeking out those who are, and I always call it this sort of just ahead of you, those mentors in business, or those who have already gone before you, who can share their wisdom and ideas. Also seeking out senior leadership in the organisation and getting inputs from them. Something that's worked very well in an organisation I used to work in was reverse mentoring, and actually mentoring junior people in the organisation and having that reverse opportunity to get inputs from those more junior in their career. And I think lastly, connecting in with the academics, the thought leaders, the think tanks and the research organisations in the industry people are in, but also outside as well, and having that wider network of input to really enhance their career, their knowledge and their skills.
Hear that, learning gurus? The gurus come in last. I think you're very right to put the practitioners first there, and so on. And the reverse mentoring is a good point. Anybody who works in marketing and media and does social media knows that the best place to learn is from your kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, we have to knock it on the head there. Thanks a lot for that, Jane. That was a really interesting and focused chat. Thank you for taking the time today.
No, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Hack facts.
Sarah Otley is head of the Akkodis Academy. Akkodis, part of the Adecco Group, is a global digital engineering company headquartered in Switzerland and operating in more than 30 countries. She has a professional services background with senior posts in Capgemini, EY and KPMG under her belt. So Sarah Otley, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Learning Hack.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Sarah, you're global head of Akkodis Academy. It's not easy to say that, Akkodis Academy. Akkodis is a global digital engineering company founded in 2022, so a fairly young company from that point of view, and part of the Adecco Group. So can you tell us a bit about the Akkodis Academy and your role there? I mean, I'm guessing that you train internal people, but also external people as well. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And yes, it is a bit of a mouthful. So I always try and pause between Akkodis and Academy. Yeah. So we are a young company with a long heritage. So Akkodis was formed through the acquisition of Aker Technologies and its merger with Modis, hence Akkodis. Parts of the organisation go back 40 years. So whilst only 2 years as Akkodis, 40 years in the various elements. And we focus on the smart industry, which we define as the dynamic interaction between engineering, IT, and digital. And digitalization is making industries across the globe smarter with increasing operational efficiency and performance. And to do this, there's significant innovation in digital and tech engineering, with initiatives which really increase the consumption of cloud, of computer chips, and of data. So everything is expanding at a fast rate. Akkodis itself has 50,000 engineers and tech experts in 7 tech practices and across 7 global industries. So if I now come on to the Academy, Akkodis Academy is one of the 4 service lines. And as you said, John, we develop our own permanent teams. We have just under 30,000 permanent workforce. We develop our temp teams. We are a staffing organisation as part of the Adecco Group. But we can also skill client teams, so individuals we have no employment relationship with. And my role is to globalise what we do. In 2023, we skilled over 20,000 individuals. And in 2024, we're on track to skill more than 40,000 individuals. And that's primarily fueled by the increase in AI skilling. I have 11 academies around the world. The oldest has been in business for over 20 years, and my youngest opened its doors this year. So quite a varied scope.
Wow, that's quite a role. So how did you come to this role? I know you've got a background in professional services, Capgemini, EY, KPMG, I can see there on LinkedIn. But what first turned you on to learning, and what's been your journey to your current position?
I'd love to tell you it was a highly planned and it was an obvious journey, but I'm going to disappoint you with that. I worked as a frontline consultant, as you rightly point out, KPMG, Ernst & Young and Capgemini, and I primarily focused on more customer experience and process consulting. But what was key in these roles for those organisations, I always took an active role in developing consultants. And in Capgemini, there was a global sponsor for the development of the consultants who, by chance, also happened to be the CEO of the UK consulting business. And he had been my consulting sponsor on several consulting projects and knew I was passionate about developing our consultants. And again, by chance, he was looking for an experienced consultant with a passion for development to move to Capgemini University to shape the consulting curriculum. And in fact, I received a phone call from him whilst I was on jury service asking if I would consider this role. And when your CEO calls you, you tend to think about it. So I joined Capgemini University. I said I would do it for 1 year because that was a massively long time scale for someone who worked as a consultant. And I ended up staying 10 years. And during that time, my scope expanded to cover all the key roles in Capgemini. Consultants are just one of the key roles. And I also had the privilege of looking after leadership development across Capgemini. And I also had the privilege of looking after the events team where we would run events in a chateau in France. After 10 years of doing this, I was looking for a fresh challenge. And I think it's good to rotate people in learning organisations to get fresh perspectives. And Modis, as we then were looking for a global head of their tech academy. And I read the role description, and quite frankly, it could have been written for me. It was a perfect match to all my experiences to date.
And further back, what first got you on the kind of learning path? I mean, what was your kind of school and college experience?
Oh, okay. Like? Oh, you really want to go quite far.
Oh, yes.
You really want to delve into my background. So I think my education, my kind of school education, was very much influenced by the fact my father was a banker. And until the age of 13, I had not been at a school for longer than 2 years. Due to him moving with his job and moving the family, and just where I was in my education in terms of moving from sort of infant school to junior school to senior school. So I had a quite a kind of varied background from education, switching between, particularly on the maths side, you're making me remember now, the different type of maths, going from kind of modern maths to older school maths, which all worked out in the end. But certainly the transitions were always quite hard in terms of, so I was good at maths and I'd regularly fail or perceived to fail initially at the new school because I wasn't used to that way of teaching.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I grew up in a part of the world which is full of financial services people in Essex. Father was an engineer. And my school experience was, I think, mostly me thinking, how can I make sure I don't have to become a banker or an engineer?
Well, I think it's always good to know what you don't want to do, as well as kind of ruling stuff out. That really, that's the, and that's what I particularly like these days about university degrees that have industry placements. Even if you end up not doing that role, you've learned a lot about what you don't want to do, and I think that's a valuable lesson in life.
Absolutely. A null result is information, as scientists are always saying.
Exactly. Okay. Don't go down that route.
So now we know where you're coming from. I know you led a session at recent iVentiv event titled Synthesizing and Scaling AI Across a Global Organization. And that sounds a fascinating topic. And AI is something I know our listeners are always keen to hear more about. And, when you talk about what you're doing with the Academy, that has a big AI component, as you mentioned, as well. So can you tell us more about what that session was about and what you were telling people?
And this is a subject very dear to my heart, and I'll kind of refer to it probably throughout AI, that is not my session. I'll probably refer to it throughout this interview or this podcast. But I wanted to run a session with iVentiv that really looked at AI skilling from an organization-wide perspective. And I wanted the collective insights from my peers at the session to really test my thinking and understanding. And in doing so, I hope to help my peers with their conversations. And of course, it's that classic, teach something you don't know that much about kind of moment, because I agreed to run a session and then I really had to think about the topic and what was really going on. So I began to, I think research might be a strong term, but I certainly read more widely on the topic. I read, from outside of the UK in terms of sources, and I began to form my own view about what was going on around AI in particular at that moment, and therefore what can we do from a skilling perspective to support organizations. But I had quite a challenge of how to structure the actual conversation with iVentiv. And if you don't mind, I'll share a little bit of how I structured it.
Course,
I think it's quite useful to kind of hear this perspective, and of course people can ignore it. That's perfectly fine. So I started a review on the of the impact that AI will have. And for me, it's bigger than the internet, and it's much, much faster. We all need AI to become more productive. And this is all around, maintaining our GDP. We've got an aging, shrinking populations across the world. But I also think there are, I'm going to say, two types of AI. And no one's going to say it's categorically like this, but there's two different types that I can see. There's a kind of everyday, widespread AI, and then there's this innovative, targeted AI. And there's two types that people need to understand. And I then went on to cover three areas. getting ready for AI, working with AI, and then we were talking to learning peers, AI in the learning function. So getting ready for AI. This needs to be more of a train first, tech later. All too often organizations kind of bring in the tech, like, here are your AI tools. And then people don't really know what they're meant to be doing, where it fits in, what they can do, what they can't do, kind of moment. It's quite disturbing. So I really wanted people to focus on, what do we need to help people get ready from a leadership level, from a business kind of role level, and then lastly, and intentionally lastly, what do the tech teams need to do to get ready? Because actually AI, from a tech perspective, it's been around, most of it, virtually all of it, has been around for many, many years. And this is what's happened is there's been a huge acceleration with ChatGPT, OpenAI, that's really brought it into the kind of public domain more than anything else.
Yeah.
So my second kind of point was around working with AI. And there, of course, we need to be very practical and hands-on because people need to work with AI, with the AI tools. And here I think we need to cover task automation, task augmentation, and task adaptation. And so automation, replacing the human involvement. Augmentation, it's a co-pilot, it's the assistance during the task. And then you've got the adaptation. This is where AI does the work, but there's a review and QA at the end. And you'll notice in all of that, I've intentionally used the word task rather than role or job. Because your jobs are made up of many tasks, that kind of thing, and jobs will change, and they'll change to be made up of tasks which are carried out in different ways, is my view. And then for my last pillar, I spoke about AI in the learning function. Here I covered your content creation. Of course, it's there. It's what we can do. But we can also use AI in our design and development. And lastly, AI in our delivery. And it's AI in the delivery that excites me the most, because I really think this is where the innovation is. This is a new kind of disruption, because it really allows us to learn and practice at a scale we've never seen before. Before we're being constrained by availability of people, or it's been quite mechanical. But this, with AI, with agents who can help people practice and give feedback, because people can genuinely put these skills into practice in a robust way, rather than just constrained to the classroom or something that happens afterwards. So that was my session. Was attended by a cross section of people who were at iVentiv, some people from vendors, and I was asking them quite controversially, what do you think will happen to content libraries as we move forward? Because AI could create all the content, whether we think that's accurate or not, and hallucinations and all those kind of things, with some caveats. And we got into a discussion about how content libraries might become context libraries to put things into perspective. But for me, it was a useful way of, for some people, completely, they hadn't really thought about AI at all. Others deeply involved and could give some builds on what I was saying.
Sounds like a really fascinating session, and those are really current and important questions, I think, especially about what's going to happen to the content libraries. I'm sure a lot of people and shareholders of companies are wondering about that now. But you were also at the London iVentiv event in October, chaired by Charles Jennings, that I was supposed to go to, but couldn't because I was ill. So I'm relying on. Oh yeah, I'm sorry I missed you. It would have been good to talk to you there, but I'm talking to you now. And you can report back to me about that event. What did you learn from it? And having had some time to think about it now, what are your reflections?
So first thing to say was I had chosen to attend the October session as Charles was the chair. Never had an opportunity to kind of be in person with Charles, so I thought it was a great opportunity. And then, as you know, the iVentiv sessions are always an invaluable way to connect with peers and have discussions that you would never have otherwise. You don't talk to these people, you don't know who they are, you'd never have such an open conversation. And the session in October was no different. So for me, there were some very practical discussions on measurement, focusing on where learning initiatives could make or save money, and how we could use things like A/B testing to prove value. So impact is one of my top topics at the moment. So this was an area that was very interesting to me. Yeah, unsurprisingly, there were sessions on skills, especially around AI, and how there were options on whether skills were built, bought, borrowed, or botted. And botted was a new one for me.
Sorry, can you say those again? Built, bought, borrowed, or botted? Yes.
Botted, so automated. And I think that was a really kind of one of those moments where I went, yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. There was also a bridged, there was a fifth B, but I'm not sure I understood that. So just for transparency, there was another B, but I'm not sure. I can't cover that one. I can't be fair to that one. And there was also a session on kind of how the learning function itself, knows, learns, and grows. So that's about knows is about how does the learning function know the skills that matter. It learns is about how does the learning function kind of make sure people learn the skills that happen next, that the business need next. And grows are like, how can the learning function grow the skills that are needed now? And in the past, I've been using the today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow skilling horizon to start thinking about, what do we need now? What do we need next? And tomorrow, and what do we need day after tomorrow? What's a more longer term initiative that we have longer horizon to build skills for? So it was encouraging for me to hear some of this kind of played back by various conversations and with various speakers. But a key session for me was Charles's session on the outlook into the future. And he spoke about evolving the learning strategy and operating model. He encouraged us to think about, consider if we had an opportunity for a fresh initiative around learning, free from legacy constraints, focusing on the new technology and leveraging AI as a disruptor to transform, the learning models we know today. And he was advising us to align, which makes absolute sense, to align the learning with your organization's core values, the use cases that it can see, and the behaviors that we want to see in the future. And by doing this, we can be more linked back to the business objectives and back on that tangible impact, because we know where learning is going to make the difference.
Okay.
So definite food for thought over the 2 days. And I'm sorry you missed it.
So am I now, even more so. But I have talked to Charles several times. So yeah. As someone in the position of leading learning for a global digital engineering company, you're very much at the sharp end of technological advance and all those things you've been talking about, and particularly in those areas where digital and AI will impact our lives in the physical realm. This is this collision that you deal with of kind of technology and engineering, not just through the devices we're used to using, like computers and smartphones. What changes in our physical environment do you foresee happening in the next few years? Physical work environment, principally, I suppose. And how should L&D equip itself with the new challenges that are likely to come its way as a result? I mean, we've been through this kind of upheaval of more and more working from home, thanks to the pandemic. But what kind of ways would we expect to see our physical work environment change more as a result of digital engineering? And how can L&D prepare itself?
Yeah, this is where my crystal ball is perhaps a bit limited. In my earlier responses, I spoke about two things. I spoke about smart industry, and I spoke about AI. So, smart industry, and that's as you were saying, John, this is where we bring together engineering, IT, and digital, or to put it another way, physical and virtual, hardware and software. And then when I spoke about the session I ran for iVentiv around AI, I said that I think there are two types of AI. There's the kind of everyday widespread, and then there's the innovative targeted AI. And my hunch is, it's only ever a hunch, is that the everyday widespread AI, the things that we need everyone to do to be more productive, will use the devices that we're more used to currently. Of course, these are going to evolve, and I'm not ruling out innovations in this space, but I think we've had the kind of big innovation, and these will move from kind of first generation to second generation to third generation innovation, kind of evolution. I think the area that is perhaps less familiar is the innovative and targeted AI. And to bring that to life, what kind of things am I talking about? I've got kind of autonomous driving and kind of life sciences. So autonomous driving, obviously the car drives itself, and that brings together. It's available here and now. It brings together many different elements of physical and virtual hardware and software to make it work. And there's a lot of data that gets processed. It is very much a connected car. However, adoption is slow. We don't trust the solutions yet, and we prefer to rely on the fallible humans as drivers because that's what we're used to. We don't want to let go of that control. And then if I look at life science and healthcare, I think this is an area that's going to undergo massive disruption and innovation in the coming years. But unfortunately, I don't think I have the imagination to know what that could look like. So if I come back to your question about what's the impact on L&D, I think the scale solutions that L&D need to be looking at, the everyday, is far more kind of how can we help people use these tools in the flow of work? The art of the possible, that what could it do to help you to be more productive, and the kind of helping people let go a little bit of control about, well, I used to do that, that's my value. But actually the value is more in the critical thinking and the use of the output coming from AI. So I think it's more about how do you get that into the environment. And if we think about, to come back to the point you were saying earlier, John, about the office environment, it tends to be the place where people will go and collaborate, the physical collaboration, not for going in for meetings and sitting in rooms with your headphones on. Maybe that's where you're going to get the aha moments around using some of these tools, in that collaboration by working on a common use case. And I think that's where we need to focus as a learning function.
Yeah, interesting. With that question, I was conscious of asking you to do a very difficult thing because it's kind of those physical constraints. And as you say, like people, a while ago, several years ago now, Elon Musk was saying we'll have self-driving cars next year, but it's all about adoption. You only need one kitten to get run over by an autonomous vehicle, and you have a kind of complete blanket ban on them.
Well, it's more than that. So there's some real ethical questions, and this comes back to some of the AI questions as well. So, undoubtedly, an autonomous car will have there will be an accident. Maybe it's the cat, maybe it's a human, but it will happen. And I'm not saying that was the fault of the car, if that makes sense. Something happened; it had an accident. But then, as humans, we kind of like, well, who do we blame for that? Who's at fault that this car had an accident? And when you got someone driving it, it's quite obvious. It's the driver, because they're driving it. I mean, maybe they could pin it on the car manufacturer if there's a fault with the car. But typically we say it's the driver. It was a driver error. Yeah. But when there's no driver, who's at fault?
Well, Elon Musk, obviously, is to blame for everything.
Well, that's fair. We can leave it there. But is it Elon Musk? Is it his car manufacturer?
It's a really good
Tesla?
Point.
Is it the software engineer who wrote the bit of code that did that function, whatever didn't work at that moment? There's kind of who's at fault, and we haven't sorted that out from an ethical perspective to even consider: are we okay with moving to autonomous cars, even though the accident rate is far lower than as humans.
Well, 10,000 road deaths a year or whatever it is in the UK.
Exactly.
I think that's so interesting. These are questions that we're dealing with all the time now, aren't they? They're kind of about accountability with technology and the accountability that technology companies don't have at the moment for kind of discourse in the public sphere and stuff like that. And as we move into more and more of a kind of Internet of Things, phrase that people have stopped using, but it is,
they have stopped using it weirdly, but but to get some
so
of these
many
things
people
to work,
get caught
you
a
need
cropper
all
on
this.
these things.
Yes.
I kind of started getting very enthusiastic about Google Glasses, decades ago, and then that was a complete turkey. It was a complete non-starter,
Well,
really.
are they coming back?
And again that happens, and then you get sudden things like the really rapid adoption of the smartphone when the iPhone came out. That these things are very difficult to predict, aren't they? That's why it's so difficult. But I wanted to say that I think what was really interesting about your response was that you zeroed in on this issue of control, accountability. I think those are really central questions. I think it's really, really interesting. So we have to close out now. And finally, in our crowded and teeming media landscape nowadays, it's a question I've asked everybody on this episode. Who, in your view, should executives seek out and listen to for sound judgment and advice, other than yourself, of course?
So I'm hoping you asked me the question. How do I form my opinion to give advice?
Yes, that's
good.
That's the question.
So firstly, the first thing I'd say is this isn't a one-off exercise. There might be times when you do more of this or less of it, but it's always there in the background. And I tend to look at this from two perspectives: people and topics. There are people that I follow, and I'm a classic follower. Just for full confession, I read things and I don't tend to contribute to the discussion, at least not yet. Okay, but I'm a kind of absorb kind of opinions from others. So the people I tend to follow, and none of these are going to be radically new, I don't think. I've got Amanda Nolan that I read, Laurie Nars Hoffman, Ross Stevenson. I love his Still These Thoughts newsletter. I'm a big fan of that. I follow Nick Shackleton-Jones, Filtered with Mark Bowers. Mark Bowers-Anders, Donald Russell. Also, my former boss at Capgemini University, Stephen Smith. I tend to read anything that these people recommend. I'm not avid, but I would tend if it's a subject that interests me, which leads me to the kind of topics. My topics are mainly around impact, I said earlier, and AI skilling. So if I find one of these people is talking on this post, I tend, or having a webinar, I tend to try and attend. But I don't limit myself to just learning. I try and look at wider HR sources as well. I'm lucky. I work for the Adecco Group, so they tend to produce surveys and research on the future of work. So what's going to happen to work in the future? How are offices going to be used? What do people look for in a job in the future? But I also tend to read Josh Burson for a kind of wider HR perspective. And I also lean on vendors and their research. Caveat, they are vendors. So, some of their research can come over as perhaps a little more biased, but, it's all good kind of sourcing. Yeah. And then I have to think about, what do I do with all of this? So for me, it's really important to reflect. And sometimes there isn't more, there's a kind of unconscious reflection and a conscious reflection. And I like to discuss it with my team. So I tend to use it when we're discussing roadmaps. What do we need to do next? And we spoke about content libraries a few questions ago. My most recent was around some insights that came from Filtered around content libraries and what we should do next year. So it kind of feeds in a kind of obvious and unobvious way in terms of what I do.
That's all marvellous advice. Thank you very much for your time today, Sarah.
My pleasure.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
The Learning Hack is among the top 5% of shows most listened to globally, according to Listen Notes. And if you think your organisation could benefit from sponsoring the Learning Hack, or from using our knowledge and resources to start your own learning podcasts, you can contact me on john@learninghackpodcasts.com. Until next time.
Stay curious, learning people.
Now I finally get it.